My life didn't collapse with a scandalous affair or a screaming match. It collapsed with a single screenshot, 17 missed calls, dozens of messages, and the sickening realization that someone inside my own home had been quietly dismantling everything I'd built. I'm Blair Morgan, 38 years old. I ran a small digital marketing business from the home office: websites, social media management, online ads for local restaurants, fitness trainers, retail shops, 15 steady clients, a reputation I fought for inch by inch over 5 years. And then one Tuesday morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating like a fire alarm that wouldn't stop. What the hell did you post? My customers are sending me screenshots. Are you drunk? Are you having a breakdown? I stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and opened my laptop. Every single one of my clients' accounts had posted the same message overnight: vile, insulting, mocking their customers, announcing their businesses were closing permanently. It was so aggressively humiliating it didn't even look like a prank. It looked like sabotage. My hands went cold. Not metaphorically, literally cold, like my body had hit an emergency shutdown. I called the first client. Blair, the restaurant owner snapped, voice shaking. People are saying we hate our customers. My staff is getting yelled at. Fix it, now. I didn't post that, I said, and even as the words left my mouth, they sounded weak, like something a guilty person would say. By lunchtime, I was sweating through my shirt. My throat was raw from apologizing. I was deleting posts, resetting passwords, begging platforms to help me recover access, typing the same sentence again and again. I was hacked. I'm fixing it. I'm so sorry. When my husband, Cameron, 34, a nurse who worked brutal 12-hour shifts, came home that weekend, he found me at the kitchen table surrounded by printed screenshots like I was trying to build a case against reality. He stared at the papers, then at me. Is this all of them? He asked. I swallowed. 12 terminated their contracts. The other 3 put me on probation. Cameron's face tightened. How could anyone even do this? They all have different passwords. Some have two-factor. I looked past him toward the hallway where my home office door sat slightly open. And that was the moment a thought slid into my mind. Quiet. Precise. Terrifying. The hacker didn't need to break into my system. They were already living here. Because the only other person with access to my office, my computer, my phone, was Cameron's daughter. Lila, 16, my stepdaughter. And I still didn't know if I was about to accuse an innocent kid or finally name the person who had been smiling at me while they destroyed my life. Before everything turned into evidence folders and court dates, my life looked normal. Not perfect, but steady in that hard-working, adult way I used to be proud of. I'm Blair Morgan, and I built my business the way people build a backbone. Slowly, painfully, with a lot of invisible days where nothing feels like progress until suddenly it does. 5 years ago, I got laid off from a corporate marketing job, the kind of layoff that's packaged with polite smiles and restructuring like it's not a personal earthquake. I remember sitting in my car afterward with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, thinking, so this is how a life gets edited without your permission. Instead of crawling back into another office, I started freelancing. Websites for small restaurants, social media calendars for local gyms, Facebook ads for boutiques run by women who knew product better than algorithms. I worked from coffee shops, from my apartment, from anywhere that had Wi-Fi and didn't judge me for ordering the cheapest drink and staying 3 hours. Eventually, I had enough clients to rent a small house and dedicate one bedroom as a home office. I loved the quiet ritual of it. Desk, laptop, calendar, client notes lined up like a plan I could actually control. Then I met Cameron. We met at a community fundraiser, a support the hospital dinner where the food was bland and the conversation was mostly people pretending they weren't checking their phones. He was there because the hospital pushed staff to show up, and he looked like someone who'd been standing too long. Tired eyes, soft smile, the kind of calm that comes from being forced to stay calm for other people. When I told him I ran my own business, he nodded like that meant something, like he respected it. I'm a nurse, he said. Med-surg floor, 12-hour shifts. I'm basically a ghost with a paycheck. I laughed. I'm a marketing coordinator, therapist, and emergency hotline for small business owners. He laughed too, and it felt easy. It felt like standing next to someone who understood pressure without turning it into a competition. We dated for 8 months before he asked if I wanted to move in. That was the first time I heard the name that would later become the sharpest edge in my life, Lila. She's 13, he said carefully, like he was placing glass on a table. Smart, moody sometimes. Typical teen stuff. Her biological father moved to another state when she was 10. When I eventually met her, Lila didn't do anything dramatic. No tantrum, no slammed doors. She just looked at me. Not curious, not excited, just a long, assessing stare like she was collecting data. Hi, I said, keeping my voice gentle. I'm Blair. She lifted one shoulder in a half shrug. I know. That was it. No warmth, no hostility. Just a quiet, I'm aware you exist. Cameron tried hard to make things feel natural. He'd suggest movie nights, family dinners. He'd encourage Lila to include me. Blair's good at this. Blair can help with that. He wanted us to be blended. Like you could just stir people together and call it a family. And I tried. I really did. I helped her with homework when she asked. I drove her to school when Cameron's shift started too early. I taught her little things about design when she lingered at my office door, pretending she was just bored. Sometimes she'd point at my screen. How do you make that? I'd swivel my chair. Like this. See? Layers, fonts, spacing. She'd watch with a blank face, then nod once and walk away. Back then, I told myself, she's adjusting. She's a teenager. Give her time. And for the first 2 years of my marriage, it almost worked. Lila got decent grades, stayed out of trouble. Cameron and I didn't fight much. We were tired, but we were a team. My business grew to around 15 regular clients. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, about $4,000 a month, enough to contribute fairly to the household, while Cameron carried the heavier, guaranteed paycheck side. I thought we were building something solid. And that's what made the collapse so disorienting, because it didn't start with a disaster. It started with tiny, almost laughable glitches. An email missing, a file moved, a password not working, even though I was sure it was right. At first, I blamed myself. Then I blamed technology. I didn't realize I should have been blaming the person who lived down the hall. The first signs of something being wrong were so small, they almost felt embarrassing to take seriously. An email thread would disappear from my inbox, only to reappear days later, buried in a folder I never used. A client draft would be renamed something random. 3 letters, no date. A scheduled post would go live 5 minutes early, or with a typo I knew I hadn't made. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Running a business from home means there's no clear line between work and rest. I'd answer messages while making coffee, edit captions late at night, double-check ads while Cameron slept. I told myself I was just stretched thin. Then clients started noticing. One afternoon, a restaurant owner called me, irritation buzzing under his voice. Blair, why did your scheduled post make fun of customers who asked for substitutions? My stomach dropped. What? It didn't. He forwarded me the screenshot. The caption had been edited. Subtle sarcasm twisted into something mean-spirited. I apologized. Fixed it. Sent a discount invoice the next month as goodwill. Another time, a fitness trainer messaged me asking why her Instagram had posted photos of another gym's food menu. Wrong business, wrong branding, wrong everything. I triple-checked my drafts. The timestamps didn't match when I'd worked on them. I must have mixed up accounts, I said, even as the explanation tasted false. I started working slower, more carefully, writing drafts in separate documents, checking everything before publishing, logging out of accounts manually, changing passwords. Still, the problems continued. A boutique's Facebook page suddenly shared conspiracy theory articles about scams and fake weight loss cures. A website homepage replaced clean copy with blocks of nonsense text. Every fix took time. Every apology chipped at something fragile. My reputation. Local business communities are small ecosystems. Word travels faster than logic. Clients didn't accuse me outright, but they started hovering. Can we approve posts before they go live? Can you CC me on everything? Are you okay? I worked longer hours, not because there was more work, but because I was afraid of what I'd miss if I didn't watch everything like a hawk. Cameron noticed. You're always tense lately, he said one night while reheating leftovers. Is the business okay? I hesitated. I don't know. Something keeps going wrong and I can't explain it. Could it be your computer? He asked. Maybe it's old. Maybe, I said, though I'd already run diagnostics. Nothing was wrong. He suggested hiring help, outsourcing. I nodded without committing. What I didn't say was the thought that had started whispering at the back of my mind. These errors feel intentional. Not sloppy, not random, targeted. And that terrified me more than any technical glitch, because intention implies a person. I started paying attention to my house in a way I never had before. Who was home when things went wrong? Who walked past my office? Who knew my routines? Cameron worked 12-hour shifts. On days the issues happened, he was almost always gone. That left one other presence in the house. Lila. She'd been homesick the day one of the biggest client mess-ups happened. I remembered seeing her curled on the couch, phone glowing in her hand. She'd looked up when I passed, expression unreadable. Sometimes, when I stepped away from my desk to grab water, I'd come back and feel unsettled. Not because anything was obviously wrong, but because the room felt touched, like something had shifted a fraction of an inch. I hated myself for even thinking it. She was 16, a kid, Cameron's daughter. Accusing her, even internally, felt like crossing a line you can't uncross. So instead of confronting her, I did what people do when they're scared of the truth. I collected patterns. Dates, times, devices, and quietly, without telling anyone, I installed a small security camera in my office. When Cameron asked why, I kept my voice casual. For insurance, I said, in case of a break-in. He nodded, trusted me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might finally get an answer, even if I wasn't ready for what it would cost me. The truth didn't come quietly. It arrived like a punch I wasn't expecting, though the hints had been there all along. I had been reviewing the security footage for a week, watching carefully whenever the office door creaked open. At first, it was nothing alarming. Just me stepping away, a package delivered, Cameron walking past to grab a drink. Then I saw it. Lila, sitting at my desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard, laughing softly, a little too proud, a little too knowing for a 16-year-old. She paused occasionally to scroll through a client's social media feed, then typed again, eyes glinting with that mix of mischief and calculation that made my stomach turn. I froze. My throat went dry. My hands hovered over the mouse, then dropped. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to blink, reset my eyes, and make it go away, but it didn't. Every day she came in while I was out. 10 minutes. 20. Sometimes an hour. Emails disappeared. Posts were altered. Content corrupted. The big attack, the one that lost me 12 clients in one morning, was her masterpiece. I knew it now. There was no doubt. I called Cameron as soon as he walked in from his shift. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but low, the kind of calm that carries storms. "About what?" he asked, eyes tired. He always looked tired. I hated that I was about to drag his family into a nightmare. I pulled the printouts and screenshots from my bag, spread them across the kitchen table. Each timestamp, each corrupted post, each angry client message. The evidence was brutal, systematic, deliberate. "This isn't a tech issue," I said, pointing at the security footage. "It's her. Lila's doing this." Cameron's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Lila? That's impossible. She wouldn't—" He trailed off, voice breaking as he tried to reconcile the child he raised with the person in the footage. "I didn't want to believe it either," I admitted. "I watched her on camera, every day. She's been sabotaging my business for months." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Cameron's uneven breathing. Finally, he said, "Why? Why would she do this?" I looked at the photographs of clients' angry comments, their screenshots, their upset voices still echoing in my mind. "She said she wanted me to fail, so you'd spend more time with her. She wanted things to be like before I moved in. She wanted your attention focused on her, not on the family, not on a business she didn't understand. She wanted me gone." Cameron's jaw tightened. His hands trembled as he picked up a printout, flipping it like the act could absorb the reality. She didn't understand consequences?" I shook my head. "She understood perfectly. It's all calculated, not random, not teenage mistakes. She knew what she was doing." He slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I should have seen something. I failed as a parent." "No," I said firmly. "You tried. You balanced shifts, school, parenting. She made a decision, and it's on her. But we need to address this. Legally, if nothing else. My business is ruined." Cameron's eyes shot up, filled with something between fear and anger. "You're pressing charges? Against my daughter?" I nodded. "I have to. The losses are real. Thousands of dollars. Reputation, trust, everything. If I don't act, it's not just about money. It's about setting a line. Consequences exist for a reason." He shook his head, voice cracking. "She's 16. She's my kid. How could you—" Your kid is also a criminal, I said, and I don't want this to happen to anyone else. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it because someone's life and livelihood are at stake. Cameron got up abruptly, pacing. So what now? She goes to court? I don't even know if I can handle this. I watched him struggle. My heart wasn't cold. I knew he loved her, but I also knew that love couldn't erase what had been done. I said nothing else. I didn't need to. The security footage, the printouts, the numbers, they spoke louder than any argument. The inciting incident, the explosion that made the quiet destruction visible, had already happened. From this moment, nothing would be the same. I could feel the weight settle in my chest, a heaviness that was part dread, part grim relief. The secret was out, the betrayal was named, and the next steps, lawyers, court, custody, family fractures, were waiting just ahead. Because sometimes the worst acts aren't out in the open. They live quietly in a house, in a teenage grin, in an empty office, until finally someone notices. And when you notice, you can't unsee it. The first night after confronting Cameron and realizing Lila had destroyed my business, I sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were out. The house was quiet, almost oppressively so, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until every little creak sounds like a shout. My hands rested on the scattered printouts, but I couldn't bring myself to sort them or review them again. I just stared at the timestamps, the client's messages, the screenshots of posts that should never have gone live. Each one was a stab, and each one carried the weight of months of quiet sabotage. I felt a dizzying cocktail of emotions: betrayal, disbelief, anger, and a profound exhaustion. I had trusted Lila in my own way. I had tried to be patient, to include her, to guide her gently into a stepdaughter-stepmother relationship. And now, none of it mattered. She had used that trust as a tool to dismantle my work, my reputation, my livelihood. My stomach churned, and yet a part of me felt the eerie clarity that only comes when the truth finally arrives. Everything I had suspected was confirmed. Sleep didn't come. I replayed the videos in my mind, her casual, almost proud smile at the keyboard. My heart pounded in my chest as if it were trying to escape my ribcage. I kept asking myself, over and over, how could someone so young and seemingly innocent do something so calculated? How did I miss it? Every parent has doubts, but these were different. They were self-directed, slicing doubts that I had overlooked signs I might have acted on sooner. By morning, I forced myself to stand, even though the room spun slightly. I had to think. I had to plan. There was the business to consider, the clients to call, and the legal steps that needed action. But I also had to navigate Cameron's reaction. He was torn between loyalty to his daughter and acknowledging the reality that she had committed a serious act. Watching him struggle, seeing the torment in his eyes, made me ache in a different way. Because I understood parental love, yet I also had to hold firm boundaries. The reality of his pain didn't change the necessity of mine. I decided to confront the practical consequences first. I made calls to clients to explain the situation, apologize, and assure them corrective steps were underway. The conversations were exhausting. Some were angry, some sympathetic, but all required the energy of someone performing on a tightrope, calmly, professionally, while internally my nerves were taut. Each conversation was a small victory, a momentary reclaiming of control, and yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the image of Lila at my desk, laughing at the chaos she had orchestrated. Emotionally, I oscillated between fury and sorrow. I hated that she was smart enough to understand the damage she caused, and simultaneously, I felt a strange parental twinge of disappointment because the child I had tried to reach had deliberately chosen destruction over growth. I asked myself countless times if I had failed, if there was a moment I could have intervened, a line I could have drawn earlier, but every answer circled back to the same truth. She made her choice, and I had done my part to try to include her and guide her. The responsibility for her actions rested squarely on her shoulders. That evening, I watched Cameron. He was pacing the living room, hands running through his hair, muttering fragments about family, justice, and what this means for her future. I wanted to comfort him, but I also knew that comfort couldn't erase reality. He had to face it as much as I did. The balance between empathy for his pain and the uncompromising need to protect myself and my livelihood was delicate, almost unbearable. I realized then that there would be no simple resolution. No single conversation would fix what had been broken. I had to prepare for legal action, for confronting Cameron's protective instincts, for the emotional fallout of both my personal and professional worlds. And most importantly, I had to steel myself to remain impartial, even as my heart ached. My trust had been violated, and my home no longer felt safe. By the time I finally allowed myself to rest, exhaustion had overtaken anxiety, though the knots in my chest lingered. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of Lila's smiling face at my keyboard, typing words that could ruin lives. When I woke, I knew one truth: nothing would ever feel normal again. The days that followed were a battlefield of emotions, logistics, and moral dilemmas. Cameron and I barely spoke except to exchange clipped updates on Lila's whereabouts or the latest discovery of tampered posts. The house, once a place of refuge, became an arena. Every creak in the floorboards, every click from my home office, reminded me that trust had been shattered. I spent long hours meticulously reviewing client accounts, restoring what I could, documenting each alteration, and preparing a timeline for legal purposes. Each piece of evidence was a double-edged sword. It protected me professionally, but also deepened the personal wound. Knowing that the perpetrator lived under my roof made every keystroke and every file I recovered a bitter reminder that the attack was intimate, deliberate, and personal. Cameron's perspective added complexity. His instinct was to shield Lila, to frame her actions as juvenile curiosity or a lapse in judgment caused by teenage rebellion. "She's just a kid," he said repeatedly, pacing late into the night. "She didn't understand the consequences." But the evidence didn't lie. The systematic nature of her sabotage, the months of planning, the synchronized attacks on multiple client accounts, it was undeniable. Each time I reminded him of this, he recoiled as if I were delivering a verdict against him as much as her. Family dynamics complicated everything. Cameron's own parents, who lived several states away, were suddenly embroiled in debates I had never asked for. Phone calls came in, asking, gently at first, and then more insistently, if I could find a way to handle this privately. Their concern for Lila's future and social reputation collided with my need for restitution and professional accountability. Even friends began offering advice, some suggesting I let it slide, while others were unflinching. The child had to face consequences. Every conversation reminded me that the world I had created, a carefully balanced home and business, was now infiltrated by conflicting loyalties. Lila's behavior escalated in subtle, chilling ways. After I confronted Cameron, she retreated into silence, but the tension in her eyes betrayed awareness. She would linger outside my office, glance at my laptop, and retreat when I noticed. Sometimes I would find small disruptions, files moved, spreadsheets altered, minor edits in client documents that, in isolation, seemed negligible but were part of a calculated pattern. It was as if she was testing me, pushing boundaries to see how far I would allow disruption before acting. At work, my mind never rested. Even while managing new campaigns, my thoughts flickered back to the office at home. Did Cameron suspect the extent of the sabotage? Had Lila's defiance escalated to a point I hadn't noticed? Each time I answered a client call, a pang of anxiety hit. What if another post had gone live? What if my professional reputation was being further undermined while I sat helplessly behind a phone? My colleagues noticed the tension in my tone, the quiet distraction behind my eyes. But I couldn't confide in anyone fully, not without compromising Lila or Cameron, not yet. The first legal consultation was another escalation. Sitting across from a lawyer, I laid out timelines, screenshots, video evidence, and financial losses. Each document reinforced the severity of Lila's actions, yet I was painfully aware that her age complicated the case. Juvenile laws limit the restitution I could pursue, and the court's emphasis on rehabilitation over punishment meant that financial recovery would be partial at best. Still, I had to act. Without action, my business, my livelihood, and my trust in my home environment would continue to deteriorate. Meanwhile, the emotional weight inside Cameron became palpable. He vacillated between rage at Lila, sorrow for the fractured family, and guilt over my stress. Arguments erupted about what steps to take next. Should we involve law enforcement? Should we attempt mediation? How do you balance parental instinct with ethical responsibility? Every discussion spiraled into tension, leaving both of us exhausted and the house thick with unspoken resentment. At night, I began sleeping in the guest room to avoid confronting Lila's presence while she wandered the house. Each morning, I would return to my office, reviewing every interaction, every post, every message, mentally mapping her activity patterns. I realized that inaction could no longer be an option. The escalation was no longer subtle. It had become undeniable. If I did not confront the sabotage legally, the damage would continue, and my home, my career, and my life would remain compromised. I also had to manage my inner transformation. The anxiety, the anger, and the fear were reshaping me. Where I once might have been hesitant to act, I now understood that decisive, assertive action was necessary. But that awareness came with a heavy cost, a new layer of isolation, mistrust, and cautious vigilance that would remain long after the legal outcomes were settled. The escalation was not just external, it was internal, a reshaping of my relationship with home, family, all, and my own sense of security. The house felt alien now. Every corner whispered reminders of betrayal. The living room, once a space of laughter and shared meals, had become a theater of tension. Chairs sat in silent accusation, cushions held the imprint of absence, and every object seemed to carry the weight of what had been destroyed. I walked through it cautiously, as if expecting the walls themselves to judge me for failing to foresee the disaster. The worst nights were the ones I spent alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying Lila's laughter at my keyboard, the ease with which she had dismantled years of work. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused rest. I felt trapped in a liminal space where trust no longer existed, and every relationship was measured against the betrayal that had ruptured our lives. I questioned every decision, every moment I had overlooked, every kindness extended to her. Cameron became almost unrecognizable. The protective instincts of a father collided with the practical necessity of facing consequences. His love for Lila was raw and undeniable, but it often manifested as anger directed at me, as if my insistence on accountability threatened the family unit itself. We argued more in those weeks than in the entire span of our marriage. Words once used for comfort now cut deep, sharp as knives, and every conversation ended with a cold silence that lingered far longer than the spoken words. I began to feel the isolation keenly. Cameron's defenses shielded Lila. Friends and family offered well-meaning but conflicting advice, and I had no one to confide in who could truly understand the stakes. My home office, the sanctuary where I had built a career from scratch, had become a place of vigilance and paranoia. Each login, each password reset, each double check of client content carried the tension of someone waiting to undermine me at the first opportunity. Sleep became fragmented. I would awaken to imaginary notifications, convinced that Lila had accessed my devices, sabotaged another post, or manipulated a client email. Even mundane sounds, a creak in the floorboards, a door gently closing, triggered my heart to race. Anxiety and helplessness intertwined, leaving me in a constant state of low-grade panic. I questioned myself incessantly. Was I too harsh? Had I failed as a step-parent? Could I have prevented this without being overly controlling? Each reflection was a spiral deeper into doubt, a trap where anger at the perpetrator collided with guilt at my own perceived inadequacy. The sense of futility was suffocating. I had built a life, a career, a sense of identity, and it had all been stripped from me by someone I was meant to guide, someone I had tried to nurture. Financial pressure compounded the emotional strain. Losses mounted as clients terminated contracts, some irreversibly. The months of rebuilding, of long nights and meticulous effort, seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. My independence, my professional pride, my ability to command respect, all eroded. I felt unmoored, caught between the need for justice and the exhaustion of relentless vigilance. The darkest moment came not with a single catastrophic event, but with the slow realization that home was no longer a refuge, that trust had been shattered, and that the path forward would demand confrontation, legal entanglements, and the dismantling of familial illusions. I sat in my office, hands on my knees, staring at a blank screen, the glow illuminating a face I barely recognized. I was angry, yes, but beneath that anger was a profound grief, a grief for the life I had lost, for the innocence destroyed, and for the realization that some fractures are irreparable, no matter how much love or patience one invests. In that darkness, I understood the truth. The world I had known was gone. The home, the family, the sense of control, even the trust in my own judgment, they were shattered. And there was no turning back. I would have to navigate the aftermath, face legal consequences for a minor, rebuild my career, and redefine the boundaries of family, all while carrying the weight of betrayal like a constant shadow. It was the absolute bottom, the point where despair met clarity. Only from here could any decision, any action, carry the force needed to reclaim control, justice, and personal integrity. It was in the stillness after the storm that I found a sliver of clarity. After days of sleepless nights, replaying every interaction, every stolen keystroke, every ruined post, I realized that waiting, hoping Cameron would see reason, hoping Lila might somehow undo her actions, was futile. The situation demanded action, decisive and unwavering. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation. It was a quiet, internal recognition. I had the power to reclaim control over my life, even if it meant standing firmly against the person I had tried to nurture. I went through the security footage once more, methodically. Each entry, each file access, each malicious post was documented. I created a complete timeline of Lila's activity. Her intentionality was undeniable. This wasn't adolescent mischief. It was calculated sabotage. My hands shook slightly as I prepared the documentation, but the trembling was now accompanied by a sense of purpose, a quiet, potent determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Cameron tried to negotiate. He suggested internal resolutions, grounding, apologies, family discussions, but I knew that wouldn't suffice. My business was not just a source of income. It was my reputation, my autonomy, my identity. Allowing this behavior to slide, even with parental intervention, would be a betrayal to myself and to the clients who had trusted me for years. I contacted my lawyer and laid out everything in painstaking detail. Each post, each screenshot, each timestamp, the losses, the damage to reputation, the months of systematic sabotage. My lawyer confirmed what I already knew. This was serious, even for a minor, and there were avenues for restitution and accountability. The law could provide a structure where consequences would be real, measurable, and unavoidable. Then came the conversation with Cameron. It was quiet, deliberate, and fraught with tension. He had spent the previous days vacillating between protecting his daughter and acknowledging the damage. I spoke firmly, not with anger, but with precision. "Cameron," I said, "I understand your instinct to protect Lila. I do, but this isn't about punishment for the sake of punishment. This is about accountability. Without consequences, what she did, what she chose to do, becomes normalized. My livelihood, my career, everything I built is gone. And if we don't act, it could happen again. To me, to anyone." He listened. His jaw tightened, his eyes shadowed with fatigue and pain. I know," he admitted, "but it's still hard. She's my daughter." "And she's also a 16-year-old capable of understanding right from wrong," I said. "That's the line we have to hold, for her and for me." In that conversation, Cameron finally nodded, a small but decisive concession. He agreed to support the legal process, to ensure Lila understood the gravity of her actions, and to allow me to pursue restitution. It wasn't the moment I had envisioned, filled with triumph or vindication, but it was a pivot. It was the point where the tide shifted from chaos and helplessness to structure and purpose. From there, I began planning every step, preparing evidence for juvenile court, calculating financial losses, documenting the emotional toll, and communicating with clients transparently. For the first time in weeks, I felt a measure of control returning. I wasn't naive. I knew this process would be emotionally taxing, fraught with confrontation, and perhaps imperfect in its outcomes, but I no longer felt paralyzed by indecision or guilt. I also began reclaiming myself internally. The despair, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, they were still present, but they were no longer consuming me. Each decision, each step taken with clarity and resolve, chipped away at the shadow Lila's betrayal had cast over my life. I realized that the turning point wasn't external validation. It was the moment I recognized my own agency, my right to demand accountability, and my commitment to preserving my integrity above all else. This quiet realization that I had the power to act, to set boundaries, and to reclaim my life was the pivot upon which the entire story would turn. From this point, every choice, every legal step, every confrontation would be driven not by anger alone, but by clarity, justice, and self-preservation. The aftermath hit like a wave that refused to recede. Once the legal process began, the house transformed entirely. Lila, once a seemingly ordinary teenager, became a cautionary tale within the family and the community. Cameron was forced to confront the reality that his daughter's actions had consequences far beyond a simple lecture or grounding. The fragile balance that had held our home together shattered, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The court proceedings were tense and deeply uncomfortable. Lila sat with her arms crossed, staring at the floor with a mixture of boredom and irritation that belied her awareness of what she had done. Cameron's hands were clenched in his lap, knuckles white, his expression oscillating between sorrow and frustration. I presented my evidence carefully: screenshots, timestamps, the security footage, and financial statements detailing lost revenue and ruined client relationships. Each piece reinforced the fact that her actions were deliberate and calculated, not impulsive mischief. Charlotte, Cameron's ex-wife, became a voice in the storm as well. Though she had initially encouraged leniency, she could no longer deny the scale of the damage. Even then, she tried to mitigate Lila's responsibility in casual comments to friends and relatives, casting the narrative in a softer light. But the legal system could not ignore the facts. Lila's deliberate sabotage had tangible consequences, and the judge's ruling reflected that. She was sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution payments totaling $8,000, with the stipulation that only $50 per month would be paid until her 18th birthday. The financial fallout was significant, though only partially mitigated by the restitution. My business had already been decimated. 12 of my 15 long-term clients had severed ties permanently, and the remaining 3 imposed stringent conditions that made continuing the work nearly impossible. The reputation I had spent 5 years cultivating was fractured, and rebuilding it seemed like a mountain too steep to climb. Emotionally, the toll was even heavier. Cameron and I navigated a tense coexistence in the house. Each interaction with him reminded me of the trust that had been broken, the conflicting loyalties, and the emotional minefield of blended family dynamics. We were polite but distant, sharing space without true connection. Our conversations revolving around logistical necessities rather than intimacy or shared support. The home had lost its warmth, and I retreated further into my work, now under the watchful eyes of the legal system and the lingering shadow of betrayal. When Lila left the courtroom, her expression remained almost defiant. Cameron tried to reach out to her, but I could see the subtle shifts in his demeanor, anger tempered by love, frustration mixed with regret. It was a painful reminder that justice, even when served, carries collateral damage. Relationships fracture, and the people who mattered most are often caught in the crossfire. In the weeks following the ruling, I made the difficult decision to leave the house entirely. I moved to another state, seeking both physical and emotional distance from the turmoil. My career path shifted as well. I took a stable position with a marketing agency, a role that offered security at the cost of independence. The transition was humbling and frustrating, but necessary. I reclaimed control over my environment, my schedule, and my emotional well-being. Meanwhile, Lila's probation, community service, and restitution became a monthly reminder that actions have consequences, no matter how minimal they might feel in the moment. Cameron faced the reality of co-parenting with the shadow of her deliberate sabotage, and the dynamics of their relationship were forever altered. Our family, once a source of comfort and connection, had transformed into a network of accountability, responsibility, and boundaries that could not be undone. Through it all, I found a strange sense of clarity. The emotional chaos, the professional devastation, and the fractured family ties forced me to confront the limits of loyalty, the necessity of boundaries, and the importance of protecting both myself and my work. Lila faced the consequences of her choices. Cameron faced the consequences of his divided loyalties. And I, finally, began the slow process of rebuilding, grounded in experience, reinforced by resilience, and guided by the hard-earned knowledge that some betrayals, while painful, can ultimately catalyze growth and self-preservation. Months have passed since the dust settled, and the quiet that fills my new apartment is both comforting and unfamiliar. I've rebuilt a life that, while different from the one I lost, is anchored in stability and purpose. My home office is my sanctuary once again. The door is locked, not from fear, but from choice, a small emblem of control restored. The space is mine, untouched, predictable, safe. I've returned to work with renewed focus. The marketing agency may not offer the independence I once had, but it provides structure and respect, and it allows me to channel my skills without the looming anxiety of sabotage. I've joined social groups, started hobbies, and nurtured friendships that remind me life extends beyond work and familial conflict. Even the act of taking small, deliberate steps each day feels like a reclaiming of myself, a quiet assertion that my time, energy, and trust are valuable. Cameron and Lila remain parts of my past. Lila continues her probation, completing community service and making monthly restitution payments. Cameron, too, has had to reconcile with the consequences of divided loyalties and the painful recognition that love and accountability are sometimes at odds. I no longer carry guilt or the weight of trying to reconcile what cannot be fixed. Their journey is theirs. Mine is forward. The lesson this chapter of my life has taught me is profound yet simple. Boundaries are not optional. Accountability is not negotiable. Trust, once broken, may never fully return, but that doesn't preclude growth, healing, and new beginnings. I've learned that protecting oneself is not selfish. It is necessary. I've learned that love, even when sincere, cannot replace the fundamental responsibility each individual bears for their own actions. Looking back, I don't regret the difficult choices I made, even when they hurt those I cared about. Ending reliance on those unwilling to contribute, enforcing consequences for deliberate harm, and stepping away from toxic entanglements allowed me to rebuild not just my career, but my sense of self. Some dreams, like my original business, may never fully return, but new opportunities, grounded in clarity and self-respect, have taken their place. Now, when I close my laptop each evening and stretch out in my quiet apartment, I understand that resilience is not a moment but a practice. It is the sum of small decisions, of refusing to allow betrayal to define your trajectory, of recognizing the difference between responsibility and self-sacrifice. And though the scars of the past remain, they serve as markers of endurance and reminders that even the deepest wounds can guide you towards strength, wisdom, and a life reclaimed on your own terms.